Here, just to stay on the time budget, I guess, are you gonna practice afterwards? Are we going to the bowl?
Yes.
So hopefully we won't take too long here. I have no title of official as public speaker. This is just something I'm trying to put together. It's a few videos of watching ball reaction. There's some slides about lane patterns. I was asked here mainly to come and talk about lane conditions. What I've learned over the years of doing lanes is that the actual lane pattern itself is probably less than 30% of importance when you're out there bowling in an event. The shape of the lanes, the wear and tear on the lanes, the people you're bowling against, the choices you make with the equipment you throw, all those things factor into the whole bowling environment. And that's kind of what I want to talk about today. I want to keep this real informal. I don't want to get hung up too much on any particular slide, but I've done a couple of these in the past, and when I had people hold off their questions, it turned into no questions. And I felt either I bored everybody to death, or I talked over their heads, and we all walked out of the room, and I'm not really sure if it was as effective as we really want it to be. So if you have questions as we go along, just ask them. I want to make sure we have some interaction going on, so even though you might understand it, someone else might be over their head. Don't be afraid to speak up. A lot of times your question, you're afraid to ask it, but there's 5 other people that they want that answer also. So don't be hesitant that if you're not sure about something or you want to branch off on the conversation that's taking place. It's okay that if we go off on a tangent a little bit. I just don't want to go too far, otherwise we won't get through all the slides. There are a lot of slides here that I may just skip through or just touch on really quick, because there's well over 100 of them, and I don't think we have that much time, and some of it's not exactly what we're here to talk about. So we'll kind of do that as we go along. My wife Denise here is going to have to sit here and click buttons for me. But I just want to say thanks for having me here. Welcome to all of you. I did see a few of you a couple of weeks ago. How many bowled at Bolero? How many teams do we have here? Is there A, B, C? How do you guys?
6.
How do you run your
6
teams?
plus 3 of each.
So you have 3 set teams on both sides, men and women. Okay. All right, well anyway, thanks for having me here. My name is Pierson, and my main job is I'm a tournament manager. I work for the United States Bowling Congress, which is in Arlington, Texas, but I'm hardly ever there. They make me fly down like once a month. I mainly work for them on the road. I'm always at tournaments. Mainly the Women's Championships, which is in Reno, Nevada, very often. And then I also do some of the bigger tournaments, like the Masters and the Queens, and I get to deal with all those high-end bowlers wearing a suit and tie. But my background comes from doing lanes. I've been on the lane crew and worked for the United States Bowling Congress for quite a few years, and they're nice enough to let me still do a few other tournaments. So you may have seen me at the Junior Gold or maybe the Team Trials if you've ever bowled any of those. They actually let me go out and run a lane machine, which is my true background, and I can take off my suit and tie and do that. But most notably, I'm Melissa Pierson's dad. Those that don't know. All right. Goals for today, is there anything specific that anybody can throw out there? Any main things that why are we here? What do you want to learn? Anything from you guys specifically? You're going to be just as quiet as light water? All right, I'm going to have to throw some stuff out at you. Go ahead.
Are you going to be focusing on team, collegiate style bowling, or more individual, like junior gold style bowling?
I'm going to focus more on kind of taking into consideration the whole bowling environment, but yeah, I guess if you were to break it down that way, more individual.
Okay.
What you as a bowler can do to alter your game, to adjust to things. Not so much team concept, team philosophies. I'd like to get into that down the road. I'd like to actually bring that all together maybe in a year or two. But like I said, this is all kind of new for me too. I'm not used to being in a classroom setting like this and doing this, but I'm just trying to kind of get this off the ground, so I appreciate all of you having me here. So I want to kind of cover basic pattern theory, looking at the lane graphs, kind of learning how you can read them a little bit, and just the basics of lane play. As a lane person that develops oil patterns, what I look at or what lane guys look at when we're putting together oil patterns. Kind of go through that. Understanding the whole environment, we're going to talk a little bit about lane surfaces, topography, whatever. And then there's a whole bunch of slides that cover advanced ball motion. So a lot of the slides I have here, I got to give credit A lot of the information I have has either been gained through USBC working for them and their coaching area. Most notably, a lot of these slides came from a gentleman named Stephen Padilla, who used to be a coach down at Kegel and moved on and now works for USBC in their coaching department. He helped me put some of this together. And then a few of the slides are actually from Kegel presentations that I've either seen or been part of. And then a few of the slides, such as these lane graphs, are all my doing. So I just want to give credit to them. A lot of the knowledge I have has been gained over the years working for USBC and Kegel, as well as me tinkering around the 16-lane bowling center that I've been at since the mid-1990s, playing around with lane machines and oil patterns. But anyway, this is a typical pattern overhead. You guys have seen all these, right? You go into a bowling tournament and you see this hanging up, or the coaches have it distributed. I want to kind of make sure we all learn a little bit about this and what we're looking at and how to read it. But the two purposes are, number one, as a lane guy, I use this because all those numbers go into the lane machines, and that's actually the pattern. To me, this is the pattern. Those numbers all make sense to me. And then all those numbers turn into these kind of nice looking graphs for you to look at. And when they post the overhead at the tournaments, a lot of people look for certain numbers that are on that sheet to kind of help them decide on how they're going to play the oil pattern. So we will go through this whole sheet in a little more detail as we go along. So as a lane person, I have main factors that I take into consideration when I'm designing a lane pattern. Number one is the length of the pattern, the shape of the pattern, that's the side-to-side structure of the oil, the ratio of oil, which kind of ties into the shape. The flatter the pattern is, the less shape there is, the flatter the ratio. We'll talk about ratios. Taper is the amount of oil from the foul line down to the back end of the pattern and how much it's stacked or tilted. Is it higher in the front? Is it high in the back? Is it staggered much more steep? We'll talk a little bit about that. And then just the overall volume, how much oil is physically on the lane. So first we'll talk about length. On the sheet, it's the oil pattern distance, and it is the total length of oil, whether it's applied or buffed. When we run a lane machine, it takes off from the foul line and it puts out oil right onto the buffer brush and gets it on the lane. But at some point down the lane, it stops oiling, but that machine keeps moving and it buffs out the residual oil that's built up on that brush. So you have applied oil and you have buffed oil. Where that buffed oil ends is what's determined as the end of the pattern. So in this case, 41-foot pattern on Kegel's beaten path. All right, one of the things about length is that it's going to dictate the exit point of your bowling ball off when the ball comes off the oil pattern and how you're going to play that lane. So upper left-hand corner is overall pattern length. That's the most important number in my book is based off of that on the next slide. Does everybody know the rule of 31? It's pretty common. It's gotten around, and all the tournaments that I've done, I say this plays into effect 99% of the time. It's a good way to start. And what you do is you take the length of the pattern minus 31, and that gives you the exit point of the particular board on the lane that your ball should come off the oil pattern to give you the most margin for error. All right? So if I have a 41-foot pattern minus 31, your exit point should be somewhere around 10 board. And by doing that, you have a little room to the right, a little room to the left. That's your little window of opportunity, I like to call it. So for example, short patterns, 36 minus 31, 5 board. Everybody plays short patterns by the gutter, right? We'll get into some of those graphs. Medium pattern, 8 board, 39 minus 31 is 8 board. And the longer you get with the oil pattern, 41 minus 31, 13 board. So what happens is the longer the oil gets down the lane, the less time your ball has to react and hook on the back because there's less area of dry lane. Your ball has to come off the oil pattern closer to the head pin. And the pocket is 17 and a half forward. It is dead flush high in the pocket. So the longer the pattern, the more you have to move your break point in. I've got a couple little graphs here on the next slide. Just short pattern on top, medium and long, and the happy face, that's what I call the happy spot on the lane. That's where you want your ball exiting the oil pattern to maximize your ability to get to the pocket. Okay? And then there's some more things that go into that we'll talk about in a little bit. Overall, look at the pattern, the shape of it. I like to call it the structure. It's kind of how the oil's piled up side to side. And if you're a good lane guy, what you do is you help create angles with the side-to-side oil that allows your ball to get to that break point. So if I'm going to give you a short oil pattern, and I want your ball to exit the pattern at like 4th board, I don't want to have a real narrow oil pattern. I want to have a real wide, thick oil pattern so you can play to the outside part of the lane. And we'll see some of those graphs. You want to make a short pattern real tough, don't structure it that way. You want to make a long pattern really tough, give it really wide structure. That's kind of the opposite of what you should do to create good ball reaction, but that's the easiest way to make lanes play tough, is kind of doing things backwards. But anyway, good lane guys match up the length with the shape to give you good ball reaction. So I'll show a few graphs here. Here's a wide pattern, WTBA Los Angeles, 36 feet. Break point should be where? 5 board. Anybody bowl on this pattern? Probably a lot. I think we used this at junior bowl this year. But anyway, with the short pattern, it's got wide structure. You can see kind of how thick the oil is across the whole lane. You can also tell by the composite graph that it's not very narrow. The oil is very wide all the way across the lane. The wide structure gives you a wide exit point. Straighter angles are always better. A lot of people like to play in the middle of the lane. They know that their break point's down here, but they try getting at it from going at this angle. So now you're crossing all this wide oil instead of being to the right and using it to get the ball to that spot. I would always suggest play to the right as far as possible. Don't try to get too deep on the shorter patterns. I like to say get on top of it. If that's your break point, you see this wide oil through this whole part of the lane, get your feet over, get your angle over, and get the ball going up the outside of the lane. Angles can increase if this spot down here is a little bit drier. For those that watch the PBA Tour, Tommy Jones has at least 1 or 2 titles on the cheetah pattern, which is a short pattern. Well, he doesn't win those tournaments if there's a bunch of oil down here. Tommy Jones can't throw a third arrow to the gutter and win a tournament and beat Walter Ray or Michael Hagen Jr. or any of those guys if there's too much oil on his corner. They're going to eat him up. They're going to play straight up the lane. He's going to have hang area. But for a while, the cheetah had very dry outsides where they could just boom the ball to that dry spot. And the guys that hooked the ball a lot scored very well. And then they said, hey, wait a minute. This is supposed to be designed for the straight guys to play up the outside of the lane. Why are we letting Tommy Jones, swing the ball 15 boards? So the PBA's gone through a lot of changes with their patterns. But the intent of a short pattern is to play up the outside. Normally, you'd use stronger, duller equipment with lower pins on this. You have so much dry area on the back of the lane, you're trying to control the trouble spot on the lane, which is all the hook. So a lot of people look at it and say, oh, it's short oil, I need a ball that really skids down the lane, I need a weak cover. Well, the weak cover is going to give you the bad ball reaction. It's going to squirt in the oil and it's going to overreact on the dry. It's actually going to give you more trouble controlling the lane. So if you ever see these patterns, try throwing something that's a little bit stronger. Don't always go for your weakest ball. Maybe go for the strongest ball in your bag to start. That's just my recommendation. Control the hook. Chris Barnes would back me up on that. More of a blended pattern, more of a medium range. This creates a variety of angles. Most styles can bowl on this. But because there are multiple angles to play, it also makes medium patterns the most difficult, at least on fresh. I know most tournaments you guys all bowl as medium patterns, and everybody plays in the track area and they dry it up and then everybody just moves left and the patterns don't necessarily play that hard because they alter very easily. But normally, medium blended patterns are the most difficult on fresh because there's no defined zone. And again, on this kind of condition, you need as much control in the mid lane as you can. You need the ball to be controllable on this part of the lane before it actually gets to the dry back ends to help control your break point until the lanes start to dry up and transition and you can move. Any questions on medium? All right. Again, this is all based on the structure. We're talking about structure and shape. You can see here a narrow pattern because it's a longer pattern. Still lots of oil on the outside. It's not that the lane's dry out there, but the bulk of the oil is now all squeezed into the middle of the lane. You can see that it's much further down the lane. This is more of a London or Paris is even further. The narrow structure creates you to play inside lines. You want to use all this oil in the middle of the lane to hold your ball because your break point's no longer way out here. It's closer to the head pin. So you want to use that structure that's in the middle. Biggest thing I see on these types of patterns is you have to close down your angles. You can't get inside and try to cover a bunch of boards. The ball's going to get out and hang, or it's going to get out. By the time it turns the corner and rolls back, it's going to hit weak. So you want to have tight angles to the front of the lane to your break point when you bowl on longer patterns. You want to stay away from the flat zones on the outside. A lot of people will see this structure and say, oh, I'm going to get out there and play that. Well, now they have no room to the right. Number one, they moved their break point too far away from that head pin. They got their exit point wrong. And it's kind of no man's land out here. You really have no structure in the oil pattern to help guide your ball to your break point. I did see one year at team trials, somebody tried playing the outside on a longer pattern, and they started out pretty good. They got 15 minutes of practice. They shot 218 their first game. They moved pairs. They shot like 209 their second game, and the tournament director came up and yelled at me. He says, "You told me this long pattern wouldn't play good on the outside. How is Nathan Bohr getting away with playing straight up two board?" And I went, "He's got 218 and 209 for 2 games." He goes, "Yeah, that's way too high." I said, "John Janowitz has 257, 247 playing between third and fourth arrow." So it's more about the scoring pace than anything. Yeah, Nathan had a little bit of a look, but after 2 games, he's almost 100 pins behind the guys in the lead already. So was he playing the lanes right? He's obviously in the wrong spot. And about the 4th game, he moved in. And Derek Golf was averaging like 250 by then, and he never caught those guys. He gave away too many pins, and that's that short time frame to keep up. Normally on a longer pattern, you're going to play the middle of the lane, so you don't need balls that are continuous. The ball's going to bleed off and hit weak. You tend to want to have higher pin balls that have a faster response time. And then you get any pro shop people involved with the team? Ball drillers? And I'd say it's really good to have somebody involved that can help with that kind of stuff, with layouts and especially surface preparation. But normally longer patterns, you don't use real duller stuff. You say, oh, it's long and oily, I need a duller ball. No, you needed the duller ball in the short pattern to control the back end. On the longer pattern, you need something that stores energy, comes off the oil pattern, makes its turn, and stops. You don't want the ball to continue, because now you're high or the ball's hitting weak. So higher pins, maybe slightly shinier surfaces for longer patterns. Strips and zones, just more of another medium look pattern. This is Sunset Strip. I think either Chameleon or Scorpion are like this on the PBA Tour. Most strips or zone patterns tend to be in the medium length range. They're not as blended. You can see that there's different zones on the lane to play. And it's much tougher to manage your break point on a pattern like this. If you get the ball going in one area out the lane, it might look early. You move in and swing the ball, and now it hangs on you. So normally straighter styles go a little bit better on this on the fresh until the lanes transition. But very tough to manage break points. Strips or zones, where do we see one of these last? Addison, Illinois last year, did you guys bowl that tournament? They rolled on one of these and the ball reaction looked really, really tough. Guys either had the world or they just struggled the whole day. All right, next one, typical house shot. This is where you see all the oil in the middle. Most house shots are medium length. Again, that goes back to the whole exit point. Your average guys out there bowling in league don't want to play first arrow. They don't want to play third and fourth arrow. They want to play somewhere around that big second triangle, right? Stand on the big dot in the middle. So if you think about it, most people that bowl in a house shot, if you go to any bowling center that you bowl league in, I guarantee you they will own their lanes 39, 40, 41, or 42 feet. Because they know if they go that length, it gives you the exit point the bowlers are looking for, so they can play their target somewhere around the second arrow. So almost every house shot I've ever seen falls within that 4-foot range. Lots of friction on the outside, very little oil on the edges, big pile up in the middle. On the other hand, if that gets too extreme, it can get wet dry, and it actually causes good bowlers to struggle. Because their ball sees the dry part of the lane, it looks too much, they move into the oil, it doesn't see the lane enough. Lots of 10 pins, so they go back and forth. Normally surface to control the puddle in the middle, if that's your trouble. Or balls that are shinier and have the ability to stand up in the friction and get closer to the dry and throw it, have it change direction and stop. Those are a couple different options for house shots, but you guys don't see that in your tournaments much, do you? Not too many house shots. All right. So ratio is just another way of looking kind of at that side-to-side shape of the pattern. What they do is we're measuring 5 boards out here, we're taking the average amount of oil and we're comparing it to 5 boards in the middle. So in this case, it's a 4-to-1 ratio. There's 4 times more oil here than there is out here. That's how we show ratio. This is a little bit different. This is Kegel's version of how they pile up their oil because it's measured in volume. USDC does it when you see the guy out there with the tape reader pushing the stupid Scotch tape across the lane. I always thought it was funny that we verified $35,000 lane machines with a $4 roll of Scotch tape. That's the best science we have right now. So anyway, I took out the slide that had the ratios. So like sport ratios are 3-to-1 or lower, meaning 3 times as much oil in the middle as the outsides. And then the higher that number gets, supposedly the easier the pattern gets. Taper or shape is the steepness of oil from front to back. Less taper means there's more oil down the lane, and if that oil's in the middle, like on a house shot, it's great for the air and shot makers. They have hold area, they have swing area, but as we said a little bit ago, it can be tougher on the better players because you have over-under. And the minute you start to put more taper into the pattern, and you drop off that oil on the back end, you have less oil down lane. Now the ball can slow down in a more normal fashion, and now the better bowler feels like this is what I want to bowl on. And the bowler that doesn't know where his ball is going says this is impossible because they pull the ball, now it goes high, they swing the ball, it stays outside. And for most of those bowlers, it feels reversed. That's what happens when we work at the national tournament. All the guys that average 225 at home come to the tournament and shoot their 490s and 520s and say, why am I bowling on a reversed oil pattern? All the oil's on the outside. Well, it's not. I think we have a couple graphs for that. So here's a typical tournament condition. You can see how fast the oil drops off. Very heavy up by the foul line. Taper to the back end of the pattern. Good bowlers like this. Here's your typical house shot. You can just see that it's a big tube of oil right down the middle of the lane. Dry out here. Lots of oil in the middle to guide the ball to the pocket. All right? Volume in the pattern, I don't think this is nearly as big a deal as everybody thinks it is. It's just a good number to look at. On the sheet over here, it's total oil volume, 24. A lot of people get confused by the 50. It's either 50 or 40 on most program sheets. That is just an indicator of the stream of oil that's getting put out on the lane. The streams are either at 50 microliters or 40 microliters, and it doesn't really play into it as much as the overall volume does. Lower volume patterns, these are just numbers that I come up with. In today's range, 22 or less is low volumes. 23 to 26, more in the medium range. 27 or more, starting to get up there. You're starting to see more and more of that as you travel around, just worn out lane surfaces or maybe a bowling center that's worn out. The lanes are beat up, you need to put more volume. For instance, Bolero, beat up lane surface there, and the oil they use is Prodigy. It's more of a lead bowling open play kind of oil that doesn't stay on the lane really super good. So I tend to stack it up a little bit more there just to try and get the pattern to last longer. And that's why you'll see the higher mils. Does everybody understand the milliliters? Volume overall. You can't see this if it's a Brunswick machine. This is a Kegel thing. It's their own, it's the way they measure the oil. But I would say almost all tournaments you go to are going to have that type of technology. All right, so just generally, talked a little about the pattern. When the machine's running forward, it's putting out the oil, it kind of helps determine how the pattern's going to play based on the load structure. Definitely determines your exit points and the different angles of attack that you're going to play based on how wide that structure is. And then obviously the ratios dictate the difficulty levels. When the machine's oiling in the reverse, normally we're just trying to fill in the lane. We want to protect that mid-lane part, the 25-foot range, and protect the front of the lane so the pattern can hold up longer. Let's see what the next screen is, otherwise I might want to go back. Are there any questions on the load? Let's go back to them.
So if I'm looking at a pattern, which one should I look more to? The forward oil goes down or the reverse? Like, what would be more important?
Look forward. Go back to that one of those first. Read them up. Keep going. fine. Go back to the first one. This one's good. So like in this case, one of the things that I look at as a lane guy is the first one says 2 to 2. That is the amount of streams we put out that actually go from gutter to gutter. And how many of those there are will dictate how much oil gets buffed out down to this spot. So if it's 2 to 2 times 3 loads, you're not gonna have a lot of oil down here in the corner. But if it's 2 to 2 times 5 or 2 to 2 times 6, you're gonna have a lot more oil down at this spot. So that's one thing I look at, is how many 2 to 2s there are. Another thing I look at is, well, if you look, each stream 6 to 6, there's your 6 to 6s. What do we got? 7, 9, 11, 12, 13, and 14. So those are your loads going forward. This last load, 14 to 14, got on the lane at, it's blurry for me, is that 33? Does that say 33 feet? 31? So how much oil, how far it is down the middle will dictate how easy the pattern might play also. The more you